All right, we are live, episode 5, I think we're at, for the Ladies Code Collective podcast, which is, no, this is not episode 5. What am I talking about? This is episode 6, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, let's bring it back. We are live. It's taken me a little bit of time to get myself to sit down at my computer and record. I think sometimes we have that little bit of resistance where we try to talk ourselves out of doing something that we have on the agenda to do. I don't know why, maybe just little thoughts about it not being as good as it could be. But something that I've been recently telling myself lately in order to bypass that resistance that my head is telling me is just telling myself, but what if I just did it? And that has been really cutting through all of the excuses that are there. Um, you know, I think we can we can try to convince ourselves of all of these reasons to not do something, or we can find different ways to procrastinate and all that. And then just asking yourself, but what would happen if I just did it? I just sat down and I did what I planned to do and then moved on with my life after that. And 10 out of 10 recommend. It is very helpful for cutting through all of the sticky resistance that we find ourselves in. Before we jump into this week's topic, if you're not already on my email list, please go sign up for that. I share a lot more info about myself and what I do with Ladies Code Collective and just overall good stuff. So if you're not already on that list, go ahead, go over to www.ladiescodecollective.com and you can just sign up anywhere on there and you'll be set to receive emails from me. Okay, so today's topic is around not stopping learning something just weeks after you start it. And I think this goes back a lot to what I've talked about in past episodes about, we start something and we're very conscious of the fact that it's not at a professional level yet, or we have ideas in our head about how we want something to look, but we're not quite at the level of expertise to be able to effectively convey that through our work. And this episode kind of delves a little bit deeper into that. And it was spurred on by the fact that last week I was on Twitter and I saw a tweet from someone in the Twitter tech coding community, which is very lively and awesome and supportive. So if you're an up and coming coder, you're learning to code, you're on your own coding programming journey, I would highly recommend going over to Twitter and starting to engage with the community. There's so many amazing people and sharing amazing things. But anyway, this person was reaching out to the Twitter community for some advice around learning to code. And essentially, they'd spent some time learning HTML and CSS and picked those two, languages up pretty easily. But then after they had moved on from the basics and knowing how to set up basic static sites with HTML and CSS, they'd moved on to learning JavaScript, but mentioned that it wasn't really sticking. And so they were asking if, it would be better to just move on to something else, or if, after 3 weeks, is that enough time to just everyone agrees to agree that JavaScript just isn't for this person. And this really struck me because the problem with thinking that we should just stop learning something because it's difficult or because it doesn't make sense to us in a particular time, a moment in time, the problem with thinking that is that that's precisely when we should really double down on our efforts in learning it. And I don't mean double down in like a, okay, give twice as much effort type of way. I mean it in the sense that we need to be in this for the absolute long run sense. And I think that we can kind of compare this a little bit to, taking a long distance flight. So as we're buckling our seatbelts for, wherever we're going from Los Angeles over to Paris, across the world basically. Um, we know that we're not going to be reaching our destination for a really long time, so we might as well just settle in and get comfortable with the journey, right? You pick out your movies you're going to watch, or your books you're going to read. So we get comfortable. We're not necessarily expecting to get there in a matter of a couple of hours. It's going to be like 12 hours. On the other hand, when we may be just starting out to code with HTML and CSS, coding static websites and whatnot, it's like hopping on a 1 hour flight from LA to San Francisco. We don't necessarily prepare ourselves for the long haul because 1 hour on a plane is not difficult to deal with for the most part. Basically, you get up in the air, you're in the air, you like reach your peak height, and then you start the descent. So with JavaScript, or really any programming language, I always talk about JavaScript because that's what I know and that's what I use to code with right now. With JavaScript or any other programming language, we're learning to think in an altogether different way. So when we view it from this way, we start to understand more on a conceptual level that it's going to take a significant bit of time. It's not just a matter of learning something new on the foundation of something you've already learned. Like, programming is a totally different way of thinking, and it's one in which we really need to be prepared to be patient and to really give it some time to sink in, and give ourselves some time to get used to it. So when I think about that person on Twitter's question, though, it makes me really think back to when I was first dabbling around with JavaScript. When I was first dabbling around with JavaScript, and I definitely remember having those exact same thoughts. I think we can get frustrated with ourselves because it was relatively easy when we first started out with coding. With HTML, CSS, seeing our code show up on a web page on the browser. But by the time we reached the point where it was time to add JavaScript or Ruby or any true programming language into the mix, the learning curve spikes way, way up. And we're not always prepared for it. And I think this is what might set apart those who succeed with learning to code or teaching themselves how to code, is that they stick with it for the long haul instead of getting discouraged or impatient or thinking that they should be able to pick up this totally different way of thinking in a matter of 3 weeks, when it might take years, depending on how frequently you're spending time with it or anything like that. So I think the main question that this episode answers is, how do I get myself to stick with learning a programming language for the long haul, even when I lose my motivation? And to that, I have 3 main points that I'm going to share right now. So the first is, already mentioned a little bit, but really embrace it for the long haul. First of all, I don't think it's helpful to consider it giving up on a language, or, we can ask ourselves, okay, I'm gonna commit to learning this language, but when should I give up on learning it because it just isn't connecting in my brain, or I'm incapable of learning this. So I don't think it's helpful to consider giving up on whatever you're learning, because it only really lends itself to a finite mindset where we've neatly packaged up one thing, so learning one language or one concept, and then moving on cleanly to the next where we don't even look back at what we learned and we're on to the next thing, and then repeat. If I think about it for myself, I'm still learning to this day new things and tricks with HTML and CSS, whether that's with better structuring or organizing of my code, or whether that's making my code overall more accessible and taking in the tenets of accessibility. And there's so many different things to learn. And I think when we are learning to code, or when we're in a certain part of our coding journey, it's easy to say, oh, I've learned HTML, CSS, I'm done with that. But I don't know. I mean, there's so many different things coming out every day, and there's so many different ways of doing things, and I don't know if it's possible to just know every possible thing about it. And I think that I don't think that we can be finished learning something once we've committed to learning it or learning about it. Like for me, I don't recall recently wondering when I'd be done learning something, right? Like when I'd be done overall learning to code, which I don't think will ever happen. And then even with what I just said right now about HTML, CSS, I don't consider myself done learning that. And then with JavaScript as well, I've been working on it for the better part of 7.5 months now. And yeah, I know a lot more than I did when I first started, and I feel very comfortable with it. But there's so much more to learn, and so much more to, just to learn and to be exposed to. So number 2 is, let me just move something down here. I'm working with my notes as well. Number 2 is, don't compare your journey with anyone else's. So we've all heard that, comparing ourselves or our own personal journeys with others only leads to distress and discouragement and just not being motivated. And I think that's true. I think it's nice to, look at others for inspiration, but then as soon as it comes down to comparing ourselves, it just isn't beneficial to anyone's life. For example, while someone might be able to pick up on what you're trying to learn, and they do it in half the time, that doesn't mean anything about you. We also don't know all of the behind the scenes situation of another person's life or their own personal journey, right? So like in the context of learning to code, or learning, whatever, playing piano, playing an instrument, doing anything, maybe they had the opportunity to work with a personal tutor or a really highly engaged mentor. Or maybe they'd already had the foundations of learning from, taking computer science courses in the past, so they had that to build on subsequently. Maybe they don't actually possess all the skills you imagine they have just from appearances, and they just show up in a very confident way that makes them really open to learning new things and also not being afraid to put themselves out there in a certain way that maybe you're holding yourself back. So, as you can see, all of these situations are different, but they're all distinct possibilities regarding the behind the scenes lives of people you might be comparing yourself to, which is why we can't just objectively compare ourselves to someone else, because you never know, where, if we're both starting on the same level, if we're both starting from the same starting block, or if someone's is shifted a little bit in front of or whatnot. Number 3 of my 3 points in keeping motivated is document your journey. Document your coding journey or your learning journey, or, the things you run into, the problems you run into, the things you learn. You can blog about it, you can speak at conferences, you can create videos to put on YouTube or whatever social media you use. I think that documenting your journey is such a good way of staying motivated in whatever you're trying to learn. If you're really trying to stay in it for the long haul, not only does it give others insight into the lessons you've gained along your own journey, if you so choose to share it publicly, which I recommend because it's nice. It's really nice to be able to share your journey and then, like I said, just giving other people insight into your own journey. So not only does it do that, but it also creates this intrinsic motivation within yourself, since you can actively see the progress you're making day after day after day. Aside from that, it also creates a sort of accountability method for yourself to make sure that you show up each day, you share what you're doing, what you're working on, what any confusion you have that you can maybe share with a network you're in or a community you're in. I mentioned Twitter before. The Twitter tech community is really helpful. And then lastly, if you are documenting your journey, just make it a part of your daily routine, however that may look. So in the morning, before going to bed, you write something down or you post something during your lunch break. It'll just be the best thing you can do for yourself and your motivation. So for me personally, I blog every day, and those blog posts are the backbone of everything I share in a day. So the blog posts, I also cross-post onto dev.to. I cross-post them onto Medium. Certain excerpts are taken and put into Twitter posts, Instagram posts. So I think just documenting it in however way you want, and then also using that to, filter into all of your other ways that you're presenting yourself or sharing your own journey. I think that's really helpful. So again, for me, blogging every morning during the week. I don't really do it on the weekends, but that's been 100% crucial to me. In conclusion, before the conclusion, I'm gonna reiterate those three. So those 3 points for sticking with learning something, even when you are losing motivation, you've lost motivation. The 3 points are: 1, embrace it for the long haul. 2, don't compare your journey with anyone else's. And 3, document your journey and keep track of your wins and your frustrations and just everything, the ups and downs. To conclude, if you're currently asking yourself if you should stick with whatever it is you've just started learning, so whether you're just starting out learning to code or whether you are an amazing coder and programmer but you're learning a different framework or even a different language, if you're currently asking yourself if you should stick with it or not, I'm here to give a resounding yes. You should. I think when we learn something, it's helpful to truly adopt it as a part of your life, as something you're cultivating, and that adds to the overall makeup of who you are as an individual. I've personally been in that same position, especially in the context of a programming language, asking myself if I was really cut out for programming just because I didn't pick up, JavaScript as easily as I had HTML, CSS. Now, when I'm looking back at it, it definitely makes sense that I didn't pick up JavaScript as easily as before as HTML and CSS, because they're totally different. Again, totally different ways of thinking. I could go on and on. Personally, I've been learning JavaScript for the better part of 7.5 months, and even today, I am always surprised at how easily things click now that I had no conception of months ago, that I had no hope months ago of ever understanding. And they just do, because you it's something that happens when you keep showing up every day. And your brain remembers so many things, and even if you're not totally conscious of the progress you're making when you learn a certain concept, it is kind of organizing itself so that when that moment comes, when something clicks, it clicks and it stays there. And then it's why all of a sudden it feels like everything has come together in a very perfect way, a perfect union, because it has. It didn't just come like a lightning bolt out of nowhere. It really has. Everything has kind of fallen into place that you've learned before, and it's translated into a way of, I don't even know. I don't even know. I hope that I can just end that, because I don't know. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It is really the culmination of everything up until that point of what you've learned. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. I think that's about all I have on that today. I think this episode is running maybe a little bit long, but that's okay. Yeah. All right, friends. Have an amazing week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.